All right, let's just jump right in. Today's explainer looks at a really fascinating ideological supply chain. We're breaking down a comprehensive analysis that traces the modern gender divide, not to recent political debates, but literally all the way back to the invention of the steam engine. It's a deep look into how economic systems, specifically modern capitalism, might actually be the invisible hand shaping our family dynamics, and why feminism, according to the source, ended up serving capitalist interests. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Here's the roadmap. We'll start with the industrial shift, then move to capitalism's handmaiden, unpack the hidden social costs, look at exporting the model, and finally weigh religion versus tradition. Let's get to it. Starting with Section 1, the industrial shift. To understand the present, the source argues we really have to hit rewind about 300 years back. Before the steam engine, right? Families worked together in agriculture, shared roles, cooperative survival. But then, industrialization hits, and it violently disrupts everything. It forced fathers into cities for these grueling 16-hour factory shifts. Fast forward to the World Wars, men go to the front lines, and women get pushed into the industrial workforce to fill the gap. The argument here is that this specific era fundamentally fractured the traditional family unit. And this caused a pretty tragic shift in how we view the father figure. According to the analysis, Dad went from being this present partner, someone valued for his character and morals, to an exhausted, marginalized guy. Since he was stuck at a factory all day, his value basically boiled down to his paycheck. The source literally calls this the walking wallet phenomenon. Moving on to Section 2, capitalism's handmaiden. Now, here's where the source connects the dots between the rise of feminism and corporate greed. The argument is that governments and capitalists heavily promoted feminism because it nailed three massive economic goals. First up, you push women into the workforce, you double the labor pool. That slashes wages. Hello, cheaper labor. Second, a dual-income household means you're literally doubling the state's tax revenue. And third, with both parents working, child rearing gets outsourced to state institutions. Basically, the system gets way more influence over the next generation. To back this up, the explainer pulls from prominent thinkers inside the movement itself. Take feminist scholar Nancy Fraser, for example. She pointed out how the movement, perhaps unintentionally, ended up serving corporate interests over true human liberation. It's a really profound structural critique of how feminism became, in her words, capitalism's handmaiden. And the analysis insists this wasn't just some accidental cultural drift. It points to how media conditioned us to view men in extremes, either as dangerous monsters, like in American Psycho, or complete bumbling man-children, think Peter Griffin and Family Guy. But here's the wild part. The source highlights that government entities actively push this. The CIA actually admitted to funding Gloria Steinem's M's magazine in the 60s, specifically to encourage women to join the taxable workforce. Which brings us to Section 3, the hidden social costs. We really have to look at the fallout of this system. The analysis frames it as a capitalist trap. The idea here is that the independence the system promises, it's largely an illusion. Instead of actual freedom, both men and women just get ground down into isolated commodities. Men are reduced to mere economic providers, and women end up heavily commodified, given a glowing price tag by the market. To put that commodification into perspective, just look at this number. $1.6 trillion. That is the current U.S. student debt. The source argues this crushing financial pressure is directly driving the commodification of young women. It points to the explosion of sugar dating platforms where students are essentially selling their time to wealthy, older men just to escape from under that mountain of educational debt. And, far from finding safety in this so-called independent reality, the data is pretty alarming. Look at harassment rates across supposed professional safe havens. According to the cited research, 33% of European girls over 15 have faced harassment. In U.S. offices, that jumps to half, 50%. And a staggering 70% of medical nurses in the UK face harassment. The source uses this data to make the case that the modern workplace is absolutely failing to protect women. Even more tragic is the physical violence within this modern setup. The analysis cites that 1 in 4 women suffers from battered women syndrome. And in the U.S. alone, over 1,200 women die annually from severe domestic abuse. Then there's this figure, roughly 1 million. That's the number of abortions performed in the U.S. in 2023. Now, the source frames this staggering number not as a triumph of bodily autonomy, but as a clinical byproduct of capitalist pressures. The argument is that the corporate machine makes raising children so fundamentally incompatible with labor demands, it drives this massive outcome. All right, Section 4, exporting the model. So despite all these domestic social costs, there is a massive global push to export this exact model. The primary vehicle for this, according to the explainer, is CEDAW. That's a UN treaty, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The source claims this is heavily pushed onto Muslim and developing nations under the banner of women's empowerment, but argues it's actually a tool used by globalist interests to dismantle their traditional societal structures. What does that actually look like in practice? Well, the treaty demands total secularization of family law. We're talking altering inheritance rules, promoting unconditional sexual freedom outside of marriage, and completely abolishing traditional male guardianship. And there's a certain irony the source points out here. Palestine was actually the first to sign this treaty without any objections, but it was driven by a need for international political optics, through sports and culture, rather than a genuine desire to overhaul their local social values. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Religion versus Tradition. This brings us to a really powerful synthesis in the source material, separating flawed local customs from authentic religious principles. The analysis is very careful to differentiate the two. It completely acknowledges that flawed tribal traditions, things like forced marriages, denying inheritance, honor killings, are deeply oppressive, but it argues those come from cultural ignorance, not theology. True Islamic principles, by contrast, mandate the absolute right to consent. They guarantee a woman's financial provision so she doesn't have to labor for it, and they demand mutual respect based purely on character. So when you stack that up against the cold, isolating machinery of industrial capitalism, the source presents these religious principles as a kind of golden shield. This framework is designed to protect the dignity of both men and women. It binds them together with mutual respect and responsibility, rather than leaving them vulnerable to being exploited as isolated, competing economic units in a secular market. The whole argument is grounded in theology, specifically this core Islamic tenet: the best of you are those who are best to their women. The takeaway here is that in this traditional framework, your true value is based on piety, your morals, and how you treat your family. It's not based on your economic output, your tax bracket, or how attractive you are to the consumer market. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question to chew on. If the modern capitalist system we are so eagerly exporting around the globe inherently turns humans, both men and women, into mere economic commodities and isolated consumers, are we actually spreading global empowerment? Or are we just packaging up a shiny new form of captivity? It's definitely a perspective that makes you rethink the whole narrative.